Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by KLlevents Interactive. My name is Kelly Nerses. I will be your host this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. So we're excited to talk with our panel of experts today about international user research. As you all know and you're familiar with, understanding a global market really is critical in today's business climate. So we're happy to hear from user research professionals coming from GE Healthcare, Intel, and Citibank that will be joining us during this webinar today. We'll also get to touch base and share some best practices to obtain accurate research from around the globe. And we're really going to touch specifically on three major themes throughout this webinar. So the first one that we're going to discuss will be getting to know our panel. And this is when we're going to have the chance to hear personal stories on the topic of international research that are gained from our expertise panelists with hands-on experience that they've conducted from research abroad throughout the years. So we'll also be able to learn about global studies and where we see growth in the next 12 to 18 months. Our second theme is going to come from UX Fellows, which is our alliance from across the globe, and they gave us some regional guidelines, do's and don'ts. So thanks to them, we have some really great slides and great content for you all from each country partner on advice for conducting local research in their respective countries, best practices for designing and fielding, and how to find the right resources, whether that be U.S.-based or an international partner. We'll also focus on how and when to use simultaneous translations and ensure that those translations accurately reflect the data. So those are just to touch a few. We'll get a lot more into that later on. Our final theme today will be words of wisdom, and this will be the fun part where we get to hear from our panelists, where they can share their tips, their experiences, anecdotes, everything they've gathered from their experience for running global research. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, today we have Cindy Miller from GE Healthcare, and Cindy serves as the Design Controls Manager for Human Factors and Usability. Cindy joined GE in 2010, and she's worked on quite a wide variety of projects, which include usability work instructions, usability training and development, also conducting usability testing for both software and hardware with teams that include AW, Universal Viewer, PET/CT, and MR, and ultrasound. Cindy has experience conducting research in countries such as England, Scotland, Germany, India, and China. Our second panelist today is Dolly Shostak from Intel, and Dolly is a senior user experience researcher and specializes in design, where she researches future experiences in transportation. What that really involves is uncovering what we need, what we want and love, and then incorporating those findings as requirements into a design cycle. So she really gets a feel for international research and has hosted global workshops as well. Her work is published in a wide range of academic and industrial gatherings worldwide, and she's had experience conducting research in India, Japan, Netherlands, and Brazil. Our third panelist today is Rima Campbell, VP of User Research Usability over at Citibank. And Rima is responsible over there for leading user research, and she does execution and has overseen international research projects, which include using both qualitative and quantitative methods. With a wide range of experience, she's been with them for 10 years, and her research initiatives, or I'm sorry, not been with them for 10 years, but has experience for 10 years. Her research initiatives focus on optimizing global, North American, retail/cards, servicing and acquisitions, and digital initiatives. Rima also comes from a multicultural background, which has been very beneficial for her and gives her a great, unique perspective on the global business and customer interaction. So Rima's also conducted research in many different countries, and that includes Colombia, Brazil, and Hong Kong. So finally, let's bring it to KLlevents Interactive's very own Ania Rodriguez, and she will be moderating the conversation today. Ania is KLlevents' founder and CEO, and she has quite a wealth of knowledge in this industry and in this department with international testing and user testing, and she offers a unique point of view to all of this, and she studied in Colombia recently, and she's also had post-studies in Hong Kong and Brazil. So before we get into it, we want to get the conversation started with you all really quickly. We want to couple some guidelines that we have in mind throughout the next hour. We want this talk to be interactive for everyone, so we'll have 2 channels where you can send your questions in real time during the webinar. First, you can post your question in the chat window that you'll see on your screen, or you can follow this conversation via Twitter and use the hashtag KLlevents. We'll be monitoring both outlets, and so we'll have allotted time at the end of this discussion for a Q&A. We're going to do our best to reach out to everyone's questions, but for questions we might not get a chance to answer, we'll email you directly, so don't worry about that. We'll get in touch. And with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in and pass this along to Ania. This is a great place for you to kick off.
Thank you, Kelly. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get this conversation started. So first question I have for our panelists today is really around just introducing yourself and understanding a little bit more about your experience and how you see, in general, the industry going for research from a user experience perspective over the next 12 to 18 months. Whether that's going to be more global, more domestic, et cetera, and kind of around those topics. First, let's go ahead and start with Dolly. Dolly, tell me a little bit about where you see user experience research going.
Sure. So hi, thank you for having me, and thanks everybody for listening in. So in my group, I'm a user experience researcher. Thank you, Kelly, for that nice introduction. And we specialize with my team in transportation research. So we have been traveling around the world to understand really how transportation and the design of cars, it's different and diverse in the different geographies, and how we can design things that will be useful for all those different people and their environments. So the way I see the future of research and design, in particular in transportation, is just growing in the need for international research. We work together with ethnographers, human factors people, interaction, visual, industrial, and all kinds of designers. And then we also partner with several manufacturers, and we hear from them, with people from Toyota, from Ford, and all the different companies, that we need to continue doing this work because it's so important for them to understand their partners and also their end consumers. So I see us doing a lot more of this type of research and covering really and helping them how to design the next platform for automobiles by doing this type of research.
Thank you, Dolly. Thank you for adding that. Cindy, let's go ahead and go to you next.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. As Kelly noted, I work for GE Healthcare, and I come with a little bit of a different perspective, working in a regulatory industry. We have standards and regulatory requirements that help define our usability activities, our user testing. And over the next 12 to 18 months, I do expect to see an increase in usability in healthcare. There is a revision to the standard coming out, and therefore that will most likely increase making sure that with global medical devices that will be sold globally, that we have a more global distribution of participants in our usability testing. And with this said, sometimes it can be challenging to acquire healthcare practitioners working in a regulatory environment and in healthcare. For example, we have the Sunshine Act here in the United States. There are other similar types of legislation that vary by region to region, country to country, and even by state to state, even within the United States, and how we can ethically and legally interact with healthcare professionals. And so therefore, that poses a interesting and unique challenge that we have. It's important for us to make sure we have a good rapport with our customers and users to be able to work our way through the regulatory requirements, which will become even more interesting as the revised usability standard comes out and we see that increase in global testing and user testing.
Thank you, Cindy. All right, Rima, let's go ahead and have you answer this question as well.
Sure. Thank you, Ania, and thanks, Kelly, for the warm welcome and introduction. Really thank you for inviting me and to participate. From our perspective in the financial industry, as you know, I work for Citibank, and I'm in charge of conducting user research and usability across the globe. Citi's ambition to become the world's digital bank, our digital strategy has core pillars. Two of those core pillars are as follows. Everything we do is customer-centric. So we seek to deliver the best possible experience to our target clients and customers. Our effort must be globally common. We work to leverage our global footprint and operational infrastructure to provide one-stop solution for multinational clients. So that said, we pursue to conduct user testing all over the world to ensure our digital products are easy to use. So we will continue to increase our efforts to usability tests across the globe.
Well, thank you so much for adding that. So the next question I have for the team here is to tell me a little bit about sort of how you go about selecting countries to test in, how large of a role does the BRIC countries, that being Brazil, Russia, India, and China, play into that decision, and just a little bit more about, sort of how you go about within your teams to kind of do that. This time, let's go ahead and we'll work it a little bit backwards. We're going to start with Rima, and then we'll go to Dolly, and then Cindy.
All right. So as a follow-up to the decision criteria, it varies pretty much by product, right? So we've done user research in Brazil, Mexico, Singapore, Hong Kong, and UK, you name it. From a UX perspective in the banking industry, APAC normally comes to the top, especially from a digital product perspective, where most of the focus is Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, differentiated by product and the market share of the company. So from a mobile banking perspective, to give you an example, countries that are very advanced in digital design capability, they enhance the quality of customers' lives, are top priority for us. So Asia is a big example of that. Currently, from a mobile perspective, we consider Australia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. I hope that answered your question, Ania.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Okay, let's go next to Dolly. Tell me a little bit about how that's done in your role.
So something a little bit different from what we're doing at Intel Labs regarding transportation is, like I mentioned before, we do partner with different large manufacturers of automobiles. Of course, they're experts on that, and we are not. We're not making cars. So a lot of the decisions onto where we go next to conduct research weigh a lot on, depending what our partners have their target customer base. So if we're partnering with Toyota, for example, they have both the U.S. and Japan as their most important targets. If you're partnering with Kia or another company, it will be different. So with that said, though, we do want to have a global perspective and an understanding, and we do understand that the BRIC countries are probably the extreme differences in the world and the places where we need to serve. So driving in Brazil is completely different than driving in Germany, but they're both huge markets. So definitely Brazil, China are very important. We've spent a lot of time in India when you're driving, you might have some cows in the middle of the road. So understanding that and understanding the pain points of people from India is definitely very important for us. The one country that it's not as salient as the rest from the BRIC is Russia. And I know they also have a very particular type of driving, and it's not similar to any other country, but we just haven't that much research in that country. So the way, just to summarize, the way that we define where we're going next is first, depending on the partner that we're working with, and second, depending on the geo that we want to introduce the product on.
Thank you, Dolly. Well, that moves us now to Cindy.
Thank you. for healthcare, first we have to determine who our primary markets are going to be for the medical device. And in regards to BRIC, many of the BRIC countries are considered emerging markets. And so it is imperative for us to understand what are the different workflows and users and use environments that we need to consider in many of the BRIC countries, as well as some of the other countries that we plan to market the medical device in. So we need to understand our distribution, as well as making sure when we go do testing that we have a nice distribution of participants that kind of meet the expectations of where this product will actually be used. And also understand the individual differences between these markets. As I noted earlier, majority of our products are global, and they're sold globally, and therefore we need to take those things into consideration. We are, like I said, we are seeing emerging markets, and so there is a lot of focus for medical devices working well in certain companies certain countries with specific needs.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that. That was great. So now let's go ahead and move to the next section of our webinar here. Like Kelly had mentioned earlier during our start, we actually asked some of our fellow UX fellows partners to help us as we put together slides for this webinar in preparation. And what I'm going to ask my panelists to do today is to augment some of what we've already written there with, stories or any comments or anything to help kind of draw a little bit of pictures. If during this time, if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A, and we'll try to add them as we go along. We're going to cover a subset of the countries that we've done research with, and some countries that may be of interest to some of our audience members today. So with that, let's go ahead, and we're going to start first with the BRIC countries, since we were talking about that just a moment ago, and we'll start with Brazil. Brazil is a country that a few of us here on this call have done work with. Some of these things that sort of has been our learnings as well, and we've asked one of our partners there in Brazil, Tri Consultoria, to help us with this slide. And so each of the slides that you'll see from now, a couple of slides we'll see from this point to about the next 10-15 minutes are going to be sort of the same setup. So first let's talk through the do's. The big thing about Brazil, for those that have tested there, and now that the World Cup is happening, it's not a good time to test right now. You wouldn't want to be anywhere near testing in Brazil unless you really wanted no one to show up or show up not well. Let's just say that much. So the big thing here, and if we kind of go to the lower side, is sort of the holidays. There's other things besides, obviously the World Cup happening now. Carnival is big in February and March. Testing. There's a lot of holidays, and that goes true for most of Latin America, as many as folks who have tested there know. But the thing one thing that is important to know is that testing in Brazil, you do want to test, obviously, in their native language. People tend to be more talkative, and that's a great thing, but that has some things that you got to think through when you're scheduling time, and especially if you're conducting a study which is taking you to multiple countries. In other countries, you may be fine with a 60-minute study. In this case, I would say go for 90 minutes. One of the things that that you need to note is that some even though in Brazil and in Portugal they both speak Portuguese, they're sort of different dialects. So you need to regionalize and do things like that. You don't want to test a prototype with content in more than one language and mixing, and that can be true to a lot of different countries, but it's really painful here when you do it. The other thing you want to take note is that some folks think, oh, well, I know Spanish, so I should be able to understand. Or I took high school Spanish, and I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, and I can tell you that I understand maybe at most 10% of what's going on when I don't have a simultaneous translator. So take that in consideration, and don't expect just because you know Spanish, no matter how fluent you speak it, that you can understand. When sessions are running, they go very quickly, and so it's not not like you're reading it, et cetera. In this case, testing can happen later in the day. In fact, when we've tested there, we've actually done different alternatives. Depending on what you're looking to learn and different clients that we've done in Brazil, there is sort of alternative setups you might want to consider. So sometimes going to a restaurant is fine if you want to get a group of folks and kind of get some more casual thinking, and especially if you're trying to really understand users' mental models, et cetera. But it depends on your needs. They are, for the most part, there's a lot of work happening with user research in Brazil, especially in different parts of the country. And so they tend to be one country where people understand usability more than I've seen in other countries when we've tested in Latin America. So lots of stuff going on there and things to think through. Rima, anything you want to add here to Brazil?
I think you covered most of it, Ania. Good job. One of the things that I like to add from my personal experience that is conducting research in Brazil requires us to be very flexible from a timing perspective, approach, location. And most of what we try to do is be agile and make sure we adjust on the fly for location change or respondent schedule. So those are one of the, those are the criteria that we keep in mind as we schedule studies in Brazil.
Yep. Dolly, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, so this is really great. You cover everything. And again, some of the comments about people being really warm and really talkative, which is something to note when you're doing research in the area. And I also, every time someone goes to Brazil to do research, and being from Latin America, as maybe many people here in the call, and I know Ania, something to note is Brazil, it's a very interesting market, but does not really represent the whole Latin American market. So they don't speak Spanish, they have different customs, they're being influenced by different cultures. So it's definitely important to do research there, but just note that it might not be representative of the whole Latin American countries or the Caribbean. So just that as a note.
That's great. That's a great point. How about you, Cindy? Anything else to add on this one?
I think all the information that has been presented has been great, and I don't have anything additional to add.
Great. Okay. So next thing, we have a question coming in. So how open are they to expressing negative comments? That's a great question. From my experience, here people tend to be a lot more open, depending how you're setting up. And in this case, we always have an in-country moderator, so there's someone that is who is native there. And so we've always mirrored that perspective. And so in my experience, it's been okay. Rima, Dolly, or Cindy, anything there from that perspective?
So this is Dolly. I'll just say that we did extensive research in Brazil. People did not have a problem of telling us everything that they didn't like about our systems or their cars or traffic. I guess it's always a topic of conversation when you're talking about traffic and parking, but it didn't seem to me in our experience in the research that we conducted that people were holding back on the negatives at all.
Yeah, Dolly, I totally agree. This is Rima. I mean, they're definitely very expressive. They're very articulate. They take their time to ensure you understand the concerns that they have from a user experience perspective with the prototype. Agreed.
Yep. And I'd agree with that. So, okay, let's go ahead and move to the next one. We're going to talk through Russia, and so here, it's a little bit different. Things have to be a lot more precise. Questions need to be very targeted. We still have a major mess with the traffic. In fact, it's so bad that sometimes you can expect people to take all day to traverse the country. So scheduling is you can't consider scheduling like Brazil. This is probably an extreme, though. I mean, I think it's worse than in Brazil in that perspective. And so, but you have to be very clear and very, make sure that even if you're, to the typical consent form at the beginning has to be very concise because they don't like to sign too much, so you try to avoid any language. Make sure your translator has done a very good job at doing that. You don't want to avoid December and January as a whole. We have a list there of typical days. This is just based on this year, but obviously you want to check calendar if it's next year, et cetera. Here again, evening sessions are okay. But you definitely don't want to start before 11 because if you do, you're going to be sitting by yourself waiting for participants to arrive. In this case, as far we've tested both qualitative and quantitatively. Rima, do you want to add a little bit here on this one?
From a quantitative perspective in Russia, I think we had experience with poor really participation. Yeah.
So here you really want to draw in people into a lab, whereas in Brazil, just kind of contrast, we've run quantitative studies there, and it's not been as bad. As long as you have good translation, people are a little more agile with that, and getting completes in a timely manner is not so difficult. Dali, anything, or Cindy, do you want to add here? Or should we move to India?
I haven't done research in Russia, so nothing for me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I know you've done in India, so we'll talk India next. Here, what we've learned is a couple of things. People are very nice in India. I've had fantastic experience researching in India, different clients. One thing that we've done and kind of to help kind of understand, even though we can moderate sessions in English, I typically also do an in-country or bring in someone from my team that is of the same kind of nationality, because obviously you want to have somebody who can connect with them, connect with folks from India, and if you are bringing in, if you're kind of listening in remotely, or you're going to be having someone in the back room, etc. One of the things that we've done is instead of having a translator, is really a repeater, and that helps, especially if you have different accents and different heavy thinking and nuances and things like that, because it's just easier to really kind of gauge what the participant is thinking and doing. We've seen things with I'll let Dali talk through that one. You want to think through gender and sort of differences and kind of pairings and things like that. And so the other thing is, in this case, just debriefing. You tend to, what we have found with different research is that you don't want to be very, you kind of want to have more of a conversation. I mean, this is true to all, but some folks, some moderators I've seen in the past have become very much checking the box, have they asked this question, et cetera, and this is more of a conversation. As far as sort of availability and sort of the traffic, obviously there's still traffic issues here, but at least in my experience, it's been very good from a show rate. But besides doing depending on what you're doing. So we've done stuff in different fields. When you're doing stuff, if you're doing ethnography studies in home studies, you kind of have to think through sort of how you're going to get to session. Dates you want to avoid are things like sort of the national holidays and during any of these festivals, you want to kind of think through a couple of days before and after, because we do have folks who take off and things like that. I'll go ahead and pass it now to, I guess, first Dali and then Cindy and then Rima in this case. So Dali, anything you want to add here?
Sure, yeah. So conducting research in India, it's a lot of fun. So I'm happy that I had the opportunity to do that. I loved how similar they are. So everything that we said about Brazil, Indian people are so friendly, bubbly, and you can definitely very expressive in their body language. So you can get a lot of information by just observing someone, even with a translation if you don't speak the language. But they do speak English. Just it's good to have, like you were saying, Ania, someone who might pick up their regional language just in case. But so just similar to Brazil. And I think someone was saying this before, should be very flexible with your schedule. People might last minute canceling, it's not considered a horrific thing. Arriving late is also fine. When we arrive there, our rooms were not booked. So those kind of things, just be flexible, allow yourself extra time for those kind of things. And then similarly, we have a little story in our research. So when we were transporting devices to India, we, of course, timelines are always very tight. So we grab our things and we try to enter the country with some of our devices. And customs, it's very complex in India. After 2 computers, you're taxed for anything you enter in the country. You have to pay a fee, and then it was difficult to find a location where we can get the money out, and it was just like a big mess. Huge learning point. So allow yourself plenty of time for sending devices, maybe FedEx or some other way. And if you have to transport them with you, just have a lot of cash at hand and give yourself a lot of time because you may end up in the airport for a long time. Other than that, it's great though.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely was a funny thing. I'll let Cindy, you've done some research in India. Go ahead and share some of your kind of learnings or anything like that.
Sure. One of our biggest learning experiences is the recruitment process. Because we're looking for a narrow subset of users, being the healthcare professionals, one of the things we found that it's challenging to recruit by job title. Many of the job titles are different in India, we are finding, than what you would see, say, in the U.S. and Europe and so forth. So it's easier and more accurate for us to recruit by job function, as well as ensuring that we capture some really good demographic data, like on their educational background and credentials, because they do vary greatly by country, and understanding, our perspectives of our users, their experiences, and so forth. And so that's kind of the biggest thing that we've learned there.
Awesome. I guess, Rima, anything to add here in this perspective?
No, you guys covered it very well. Thank you.
One of the questions that just came in was, any tips for moderator safety, best practices, cultural considerations when traveling to these countries? So one of the things that it depends. I mean, in our case, we partner with our in-country folks. So, Valley can attest to this, and I'm sure Cindy has probably had similar experiences, it's really, having somebody host you there is helpful. I mean, I don't know. I think from that perspective, it's been sort of my experience. In fact, if I can think about sort of my experience in India, our counterparts there have done a fantastic job at taking us around and being sure that we're, Dali and I got transportation, while on our own. I don't know. I think we were pretty well. Dali, what do you want to add here?
No, I mean, having someone local, we did have some local people that we partner with, and they had best practices. And it's difficult, varies so much by city, and also depending where you are in the city. We were in a nice area of Bangalore, staying in a really nice hotel and going to our Intel facilities. So we didn't feel any of that. But if you're doing home visits or anything where you might feel uncomfortable, I guess going with a local person will be really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, we've done medical studies in India, and we've had home studies, and then I've had also partnered there. So I'm like, that's a little bit sort of my experience. Cindy, do you have anything else here as far as your experience?
I do not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's go ahead and move now next to China. And in China, I guess we could talk both mainland China and then Hong Kong in this perspective here. So basically, in our experience, especially in Hong Kong, you have sort of more technically savvy folks. Mainland China depends on where you're at. We've had different experiences. The one thing that we have to take sort of in consideration is sort of sensitivity around private data and kind of trust factors and things like that. We've been very clear, especially when we're testing, whether it's depending on the device or whatever, or the system, or et cetera, that this is all, sort of fake data, et cetera. In this case, in China, we don't typically, in my experience, we don't use very much the Think Out Loud protocol. In fact, a lot of the researchers, when we've done work there, it's been sort of a debriefing method, and we kind of have them do tasks and kind of ask or kind of talk along while they're doing it. But they're kind of on the general perspective. They tend to be better to just kind of let them do whatever task you're going to have them do, and then come back and sort of ask them questions about things you observed. Here also you have to concern about sort of holidays. You have to think through about sort of scheduling. It tends to happen pretty quickly, but just kind of know. One thing that I have found, especially in mainland China, it's harder to find UX folks. Tang is one of our partners there, and I maybe it's sort of ignorance on my part, but I don't know of many others that I even before we became part of the alliance, they're sort of the one that's kind of been more prevalent in the country. So there's other couple of folks here and there, but for the most part, having a good partner is important here as well. Let me go ahead and ask Cindy, why don't you go ahead, and I know you've been in China, provide your sort of thinking or anything else you want to add here?
Sure. I've done remote testing with China, and we find that to be extremely challenging. Even when you have video support, it's still very challenging to do remote testing with China in regards to language, translation, and so forth. And so we find most successfully testing in China is best done in person versus over remote or even video.
Great. Rima, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I totally agree with Cindy. In my past experience, I would say one of the big thing specifically in the lab, while participants are very, very polite, they are by nature not very expressive or articulate to their thought. So we rely a lot on the moderator in the art of actually pulling and probing appropriately to pull the right thought process out of the participant's head, so to speak. So it really requires a lot of experience and practice from a moderator perspective, because they're not very expressive and articulate. Their answers are very short and to the point. So encouraging them to articulate why they were having an issue with certain experience is really a big thing, a big learning for us.
Maybe Dolly, if you have you had experience with China?
Not with China.
No China? Okay.
No.
A question that I think has come in here, I'm just kind of looking at the question, is sort of, I don't know if anyone had experience with this, but one of the folks in the audience is asking that they heard, because Chinese people in general are a little more quiet in that perspective, they've heard participants taking on a character to help them articulate. Have any of you three had an experience with sort of taking this approach to having folks open up a bit?
This is Rima. I haven't.
I haven't either. When we've tested in China, it's a little more painful, but you do get. I guess our recruiter has done a good job in that perspective. But one thing that I have seen is, so a lot of the counterparts in Asia of the companies we work with, they're typically sort of market research departments, and they're used to sort of market research-like studies. They're not really used to usability studies like, say, in Brazil, I tend to think that happens more often than in China. And so what I have seen is sort of the sort of the thinking be more like, hey, they're more used to a focus group, so they're kind of surprised when they have more of a task-based approach, and so that's sort of a surprise. And I've also seen, even when we tried for one of our clients, they were looking for someone for us to staff in China for one of their needs. It's hard to find good researchers because a lot of people are really designers that have, kind of trying to cross over like we see in other places, but it's very, from that perspective, I find it to be less mature. But going back to the original question, Dolly, have you tried that ever? Try to have them do character maybe in India, or this kind of thinking can also be done sort of where people have a little more time, harder time talking, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, and following different methods, so not only trying to understand more from context and from the environment, from observing body language and those kind of things, trying to get as much information as possible from any other cues, more following perhaps more ethnography principles, and not only doing pure usability research. When possible, that's not always possible, but definitely recommend it.
Okay. I'll go ahead and move on now to the next country, which is Germany. And, here we have people who are very curt and very quick and very utilitarian in sort of describing what they like and don't like. I've tested various times in Germany, both in lab, at hospitals, and different locations, in hotels I've done as well. But one thing that I've seen is, in this case, I find people to be, they will tell you what they think, and they will be very clear and succinct of what they like and they don't. In my case, I've never seen people hold back. I mean, they want things to be easier. They're very, succinct and very clear in that. They also just, want things, even the test itself, to be very, thorough. And so, for example, the typical system usability scale that we use for a lot of studies, they're in this case, sort of that scaling with opposite logic really just throws things off for them. And, even though, it throws off people a lot in the different countries, but in this case, it's just really, it's a little more pronounced than in other countries. So that's my experience. Anything you want to add, Cindy?
Sure. Our experience with doing testing in Germany, we were doing in-person testing. And one of the things we find is participants tend to show up anywhere between 15 to 20 plus minutes early. And it is the expectation from the participants that they immediately start getting run for the testing cycle. So we go through that introduction and collect demographics and all those good things. They don't want to sit and wait. So it's imperative to make sure that, after usability testing, normally you spend some time putting down your notes and thoughts. If you have multiple facilitators and note takers, talking, kind of having a debriefing session. So you want to make sure that you give more time in between your testing sessions to allow for you to debrief, as well as to accommodate as the participants come in early to be run, that they can be run very quickly and run right away with very little lag time and wait time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and move over to Italy now, and so here, sort of extreme to the and in this case, probably Italy more than anywhere else I've seen. So kind of think that in consideration. Typically would double book every session. That's how you have a better understanding of who's going to show and not. Holidays, Christmas, Easter, August, all facilities close down in that perspective. Here people very friendly, very talkative too, and just you want to in this case. There's certain countries you can pay in other incentives in varying and depending on what you want here, you want to think through that. also want to the fact that there is hard the access to internet. So, we found that we tend to skew a little younger here when we want to find good participants. Why don't we go ahead and pass it now over to Dali?
Yeah, thank you. So I haven't really conducted a lot of research in Italy. I've conducted research in other parts of Europe, but of course every country is extremely different. So not much to add on Italy, just from my personal knowledge, a lot of the same things that we were talking about, personality-wise from participants, really more closely aligned with Brazil and the things that we observe in India. So being very flexible and allowing extra time and understanding that some people might stay longer, show up a little later, etc.
Great. Anything to add here, Rima or Cindy?
I actually have not personally conducted usability in Italy, so I don't have anything to add.
Okay. So the next country we're going to cover, Cindy, do you have anything? Sorry.
Oh, no, I said I do not have anything either. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next country we're going to talk through is Estonia. Here, finding people can be difficult, and it really having someone who is in country that can build rapport is very, very important too. You don't want to reach out to people after 6 p.m. You don't want to schedule things too closely because people tend to be also running late. There's a sort of a list of holidays here. Our partner there in Estonia is one of the largest known ones. It's Trinidad Consulting. They do a lot of research. I've personally not been to Estonia in this case, so I'm just going to go ahead and pass. Does anybody else have anything else to add here? Dali?
I don't.
No,
okay.
I have not.
Okay. I'm going to move over to Dubai next. Dubai is a sort of, this is going to go, more general towards Middle Eastern too, kind of a lot of the things that are said here. Also, being very precise about who, sort of what you're recruiting and who you're recruiting. That's important here. Having an in-country person really do it is important. When people schedule here, you want to make sure you have enough backups for no-shows as well, because it's, they basically, when they say they're going to show, it's like God willing, I'll show kind of variant. It's not really like they're going to show for sure, so you kind of have to take that in consideration. Depending on who your target profile is that you're testing, you want to offer, maybe potentially offer pickup or drop-off services. You want to make sure you're very transparent with folks. And there's the list of holidays, sort of also some preferences on testing times and things like that. So that's important. Rima, do you want to add anything here to this one?
Sure. This particular one is interesting. Based on my personal experience, participants are expected to be catered to, and hospitality is a big key thing in these countries, and they totally expect you to cater to their needs in order for them to participate. However, they're very, very friendly. One of the big learnings is to ensure the prototype is actually translated to the proper local language, because in most cases the format of the product is subject to change based on the language format. It's not a translation word to word from English or another language. It's totally almost a redo to the prototype. So it will align with the native language characteristic and approach.
Thank you, Rima. I'm going to go ahead and push over to Japan, and Dali, you can add here on this one, hopefully. In this case, the do's and don'ts are things like, making sure you, in this case, you're precise about the questions you're giving participants. Generally speaking, Japanese can be very friendly. They can walk you even when they have to walk. In my case, I was going the wrong direction and walking to a facility, and they turned me around and walked me back to the facility when some random stranger in the street. So it's very, very, that perspective. But people tend to be, in this case, very timely, just like Germans, and rarely do you get a no-show. So that's the positive things. Sort of making people feel, obviously comfortable like you would in other countries. That's important. Testing, we've done also quantitative testing in Japan, and that is interesting because when we've done quantitative stuff, we typically have a translator on the phone. And it's a lot of back and forth going on just to get everyone on the same page. But generally speaking, quantitative can work as well in Japan. Dali, you want to go ahead and add some stuff here in this perspective?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned before, our team does a lot of both quantitative and qualitative research. And for that reason, we always try to have a researcher traveling and making sure that it's present because although we don't speak the language sometimes and we have to have translators, you can pick up a lot of things just by observing and being immersed in the context and the culture. So when possible, we try to travel. So for a particular research we conducted in Japan, this was in partnership with Toyota. So we were doing research in their facilities. And I went there as a main researcher from Intel. And I noticed, and this was my bad because I didn't realize this before, people wear a lot of masks. So they wear surgical masks, in particular when they're going to be in close proximity to other people for a long time. So, you notice this right away as soon as you land in Tokyo. It's very pervasive. Everybody has masks on. So all the participants, including the person conducting the interviews, they had masks on. And I didn't understand the language. And I couldn't see their facial expressions at all. So it was extremely difficult for me to get anything out of the session. I could see a little bit from their body language, but I couldn't see any facial expressions. So something to keep in mind from my learnings of doing research in Japan is to partner with researchers that have, of course, their language in Japanese, but also that they could translate beyond specifics of what the people are saying, and they could read between the lines and give you a sense maybe of the personality of the participant or how they're reacting to different things beyond to what they're expressing. Because unfortunately, or not, but it's just different than from other countries that we're seeing, people are less talkative. They will go directly to the point. So you need someone to help you out and really tease out all the interesting and cool things about this type of research. If you don't partner with someone, then you'll miss out on all that.
Yeah. We have a question that briefly came in. I'm going to go ahead and we've had a lot of questions come in on this one, but privacy concerns, contacting, recruiting respondents in Japan. In your experience, Dali, anything you want to add there? We do know that they have sort of heightened privacy laws like in France and other countries, like Cindy mentioned earlier. But,
right.
I think from our perspective, I guess our recruiter has handled that and sort of making sure that everything's been opted in and things like that. But how about you? Anything you've kind of seen, or has that been handled also by you?
Definitely. It's doable, but add a lot of time to go back and forth with legal, depending on the organization you're working with. For us, it took months for them to approve our sort of NDA process, for the non-disclosure agreement process, then for our legal department to really abide to everything that they were spelling out. They're very detailed, and they will not talk about something outside of the context of what you're asking for. So definitely, they're dotting all the I's, so make sure that you're allowed extra time to be able to go through everything.
Great. Okay, fantastic. One thing that I forgot to mention here, and then we'll go ahead and move to words of wisdom next, and then we'll wrap up with a couple minutes of questions. One thing that I've noticed in Japan is that, and this is true to any facility I've been to, and I think, Dolly, we talked about this a bit, is most of the facilities have round tables in them, sort of the picture I have here from Consumer Behavior Labs. Kind of see that often there, so it's kind of interesting. It's sort of the setup is more, whereas say in the States you might be used to sort of the square setup and things like that. Sessions tend to be more sort of round table-ish.
Yeah, we saw too.
Yep. So, okay, so now let's go ahead and I'm going to move to final words of wisdom here. I guess we'll go from left to right. We'll start with Rima. Tell us your words of wisdom.
All right. My word of wisdom is really, excuse me, is really demographic. I mean, definitely one of the things that came up during our conversation is the native language, the characteristic. So including someone internally from a market research team and even a local market research to help you with recruiting and ensure that the screening criteria are really mapping to the market is really critical. With my personal experience, I don't, like to do recruiting without including my internal market researcher to ensure my demographic and recruiting criteria are aligned because they know their market more than we do. And big thing is to ensure all the marketing materials and the research materials are aligned. And from a language perspective, ensure that these materials have been translated to the native local language. And confirm that with the team in the market themselves.
Great. Cindy, let's go ahead and move to you.
Sure. My word of wisdom is plan, and plan some more. You can never do enough of it. And the reason for this is, especially in a regulated industry, whether it be healthcare or aviation, nuclear, or whatever, there's a lot of times certain legal requirements or ethical requirements that need to be met. Sometimes those types of requirements take a while to work through. And therefore, it's imperative to start early and start planning, getting those agreements maybe in place. There's also sometimes constraints with paying participants, so you need to have a process or a system set up in regards to paying, say, a covered recipient and making sure you're within any type of regulatory or compliance guidelines. So there's generally some lengthy logistics that could be occurring, and so you can never start planning your usability testing early enough.
Great. Okay, Dolly, why don't we go ahead and have you give us your final words of wisdom.
Sure. So I think mine will be just adding to what has been said, because really where you will fail is on the small details that you didn't account for. Like the stories we told, traveling and not understanding customs from the country you're going to, not knowing perhaps that all your participants are going to wear a veil or a mask or something that you're not going to be able to observe their facial expressions. All those little things that no one thought of, they're going to come back and hunt you big time. So adding on understanding your demographics, understanding the people you're going to talk to, as well as doing all due diligence in planning. So everything that has been said, just twice.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and I'll give my sort of final words of wisdom here. So typically, one of the things that we tend to want to do, especially when we're doing research in multiple countries for our clients, is I always like to have one liaison through all the research, whether they're just there just to make sure that the research is conducted just exactly what we want in every location. So that also rebuilds rapport with the local in-country partners, and so that becomes very important if if you're wanting to make sure that your research is going to be successful throughout. We're actually right at the top of the hour, and we have about 9 questions that come in. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to, I think most of it we've answered. Let me just kind of look real quickly here. So we've commented, sort of, this is true, and this might be difficult to answer, but we've basically commented from sort of our viewpoint as Americans, and in this case, this person's saying, and so how should an Indian, Japanese, or Arab researcher approach conducting research? And I think that question got maybe cut off a bit, but in this case, one of the things I want to note is that typically what I've experienced is, part of UX research teams that we go in country, we typically like to do folks who've had experiences in those countries. So, for example, when we're doing work in Latin America, I pair it with someone who is of that descent, or if it's something that is in Asia, I try to pair it like that way if I can. That's important, but typically you do have folks within the teams that tend to be multicultural, and like, for example, Rima. So, and Dolly and Cindy with her team as well. So that's I don't know if that's sort of the question we have there. Anything, ladies, you want to add to this?
No, I think you covered it, and I'll be happy to talk more about it offline if someone would like to reach out on that. Yeah,
okay. All right, so I'm going to have Kelly just go ahead and thank us and do the final sort of words to us. Go ahead and give.
Okay, well, we have reached the end of the webinar, as Ania said, and thank you again to all of our panelists and Ania. I think we had some really great content there, and hopefully you all walked away with some great information. So the webinar has been recorded, and we're going to have it hosted online, hopefully in the next 48 to 60 hours. We'll have it on our YouTube site. If you do have questions still that you didn't feel got answered or you want to send in, you can email them to kellyn@KLimeInteractive.com. So, again, thank you for your time, and this concludes our webinar for today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.